All right, so with us is Jim Bruce from Australia, and Jim is responsible for our New Zealand market as well. Jim is here in Denmark, and we were recording these podcasts today, and we saw the opportunity to invite Jim for a talk about the New Zealand market. It's improvised, so we don't really know where it's heading and how long it will take, but we'll take it as we go. We've talked about to cover an overview of New Zealand for potential listeners, and to have a chat about what's going on and what's cooking in New Zealand. Welcome to this extra episode, Jim.
Thank you, Hielke. It's great to be here, and I don't mind being accosted in the hallway and dragged into the studio.
That's perfect. So, Jim, well, first of all, explain a bit about what you do in Australia.
So, Hielke, I'm the country manager for Australia. We have a subsidiary business of VikingGenetics that's been operating for 12 years. And in addition to that, and where we're heading in this conversation, is I'm also responsible for sales in New Zealand, which we do through our distributor there, Salmon NZ. And we've been working with Salmon NZ now for some 4 years, I think it is. They're a high quality distributor. They're enthusiastic, energetic, innovative, and whilst they're selling our product, they've been terrific for me in my role, because I've been able to learn from them. It's not just we sell them product, but it's a two-way street. They've taught me quite a lot and given me great ideas.
All right. So lots of stuff is going on in New Zealand. Explain a little about the New Zealand market. How does it work? What are what is the New Zealand dairy market?
So the New Zealand dairy market is actually over, I would say, the last 15, 20 years, has grown significantly in the number of cows. They're now sitting up around 6 million cows. When I first paid attention to New Zealand earlier in my career, there were a lot of Angus cows, and there was a dairy industry. And now the dairy industry dominates the cow numbers in New Zealand. They've actually displaced a lot of those beef cattle, which it's probably a fun fact that I've learned recently from working with Salmon, just how much growth they've had. So the breed makeup of that 6 million or so cows is a few 100,000 Holsteins, a few 100,000 Jerseys, about 100,000 or so red cattle, predominantly Ayrshire, and then the rest are crossbreds, where the dominant pattern, I guess, in that is Holstein Jersey cross. And the dominant player in the semen market is the local cooperative, LIC, Livestock Improvement Company. And they've been actively encouraging farmers there into crossbreeding for quite some time.
Do you know why that crossbred between Friesian Jersey has become so popular in New Zealand?
That's a really good question. I think that the traits that they really like in those cattle, they're compact in size. Yeah. They do like those cattle to be compact and lighter on their feet, lighter in the pasture. And the combination of including the Holstein, of course, brings a lot more production. So it's a happy compromise. But as is often the case with a lot of these things, there's room for improvement, and that's been the opportunity that Salmon has introduced Viking into. And that is to approach those farmers and say, look, we've got an idea where you introduce a third breed, and the Viking Red's been the perfect third breed to be the bridge between Holstein and Jersey, because they're two quite different types, and the Viking Red fits very well. For us around the world, we talk about Golden Cross, we're accumulating the science and the reports and the results and the customer feedback from that, all over the place.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting, the fact that the majority of the cows in New Zealand are in fact crossbred, because if we look at other major dairy producing countries, Western Europe, the US, all of these countries they're purebred, and they're purebred only. mainly. Then we have, Ireland is a bit more, the UK is a bit more crossbreeding as well. But in general, the majority of those, in those countries, the breeds that they use, the cows that they milk, are purebred. Why is that different, do you think, in New Zealand?
Well, I think, and again, this is what I've observed. I think we see it in Australia as well. When people need to get more cattle, the purebreds aren't available necessarily. And so quite often, coming from a Holstein cow, there are Jersey cross calves because they're using Jersey for calving ease on those Holstein cows. And for a lot of people with a Holstein herd, they're not that interested in the crossbreds. So they become a rich source of alternate dairy cattle for people in a market where the numbers are growing. So I think in Australia, I think they're probably looked at as a cheaper source of new dairy cattle to come in. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know the economics of it, but certainly it's a pipeline of new cattle in a growing market such as New Zealand. So that to me would be a big part of it. And I think, as I've said, the compromise between those two types has worked well in that environment. It's a grass environment. It's a walking environment. It's a wet environment for a lot of the comparison to a lot of places, such as Australia.
Seasonal calving environment.
Very tight seasonal calving. And I think, we've all seen in crossbreeding programs the trait that gets the biggest boost is the most significant boost economically is fertility.
Yeah.
And so in a very tight seasonal calving industry as is New Zealand, that would be a critical consideration for them too.
Can you put into reference for us the impact it has if you don't have that tight block of calving in New Zealand? What's the impact for the farmer?
I know from a semen company perspective, outside of that window, it's all over, baby. It's all over because it is really tight across most of the industry. There will be some autumn calving, and I don't know whether that's entirely by design or just cows that miss and are retained.
Because the other parts would be spring calving, so utilizing the grass, utilizing the peak production of the grass with the
spring
milk
is the big breeding season, and it is absolutely all about grass production because their production base is all about grass. It has to be done in a manner that suits that's in harmony with the environment, and so that's the key.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Viking Reds. We've done well with the Viking Reds, along with salmon. They've seen the opportunity to include that into the mix of these crossbreds between the Jersey and the Holstein, including the Viking Reds in there. Can you tell us a bit about what made that happen and why they went that route?
Well, I think whilst those crossbred cows had their benefits to those farmers, there was room for improvement. And so that's where salmon, targeted the message around the key traits of the Reds, that they are cattle with longevity, they're cattle with fertility and so forth. They're also hardy and structurally strong, feet and legs, etc. So they're mobile cattle. And I think then you play into a market where if you've got a Holstein Jersey cross cow, there are some crossbred bulls that you can use to maintain a balance of the two breeds. It's either that or you're crossing back to Jersey or back to Holstein. It's switching back and forth, and by incorporating the third breed, it starts to smooth those cattle, I guess, into a more homogeneous group rather than having the predominantly Holsteins and the predominantly Jerseys, depending on how many generations of those each breed. There's quite a bit of difference. When you've got three breeds, it's a far more homogeneous group of cattle.
Yeah, and so it's about utilizing the hybrid Vigor partly, because if let's say that you have this crossbred cow, Jersey Holstein, and you use a crossbred bull, Jersey Holstein, basically you don't know what you're going to get, because if the genes mix up, you can get anything from 0 to 100%. heterosis.
Well, and I think also there's not a huge array of options in those bulls. So it really narrows the field, and that's where it's probably more attractive if you're staying with Holstein and Jersey. You've got a far more choice in the traits and the impact of those traits that you can get from the Holstein breed than you can from the selection of crossbred bulls that are available. So I think another pure breed, and particularly one that's numerically significant with a strong breeding program, data behind it, such as the Viking Reds, becomes a better option with more traits to select for, more progress to be made than what was otherwise a limited field.
Yeah, and from what I've heard as well is that what they appreciate is the size of the Viking Reds, which is exactly intermediate between the Jersey and the Holstein. So
correct, yeah.
and adding a bit more body condition that boosts the fertility. So many aspects fit into that.
I think the strength of the cattle, the robustness of the cow in an environment such as New Zealand, where they need to walk, they need to graze, they're hardy, they're easy care. They all of that is attractive in that environment. Yeah.
So, what are the main traits that they've been looking for in New Zealand within these Red Bulls?
Well, it's not just the Red Bulls, but across the industry. At the moment, the predominant milk company is Fonterra. They pick up around 80% of the milk in New Zealand, and they're a large organisation, and they export a lot of milk out of Australia and New Zealand, and they feed, if you like, from our corner of the world. They feed a lot of dairy protein into a predominantly Asian market, and it is perceived that A2 milk is far easier to digest, particularly in a population where the consumption of dairy protein has been historically very, very low or non-existent, depending on where you are. So Fonterra are now requiring farmers to work towards being pure A2 because it gives them greater flexibility when they are selling the milk.
Yep.
So this is a trait that is something that it's no longer preferred, it's mandatory. Yeah, we are not sending bulls to New Zealand that are not A2.
And it's something that we see in Denmark as well. Arla is pushing the A2 milk as well. It's and I think globally it is a movement.
And for the milk processor, it gives them flexibility. If you don't want A2, well, we just don't need to write it on the package. It's still milk. It tastes the same. But if A2 is important to you, yes, we've got that. So that becomes a commercial imperative. It goes beyond breeding preferences. It's just a commercial imperative. And the other one that comes right on the back of that is an animal welfare position that food companies want to take. And part of that animal welfare position that they're taking to the end consumer of our products is that we're not dehorning. So we're not taking any bulls to New Zealand, except I have to make an exception. There are some older proven bulls that we're still using, but certainly all the young bulls are polled, preferably PP.
All right. Any other things that they're looking at specifically that are specifically important?
Look, I think for the New Zealand market, it is about milk solids far more than volume. They also, in those crossbred herds, they're looking very, very closely at udder traits as a key priority. Yep.
Well, we know that the Viking Reds have done well, but recently, over the last year or so, another one of our products has done well, the Danish Blue. All about gestation length, you tell me. Tell a bit more about that.
Well, again, as we mentioned earlier, it's a very, very tight seasonal calving pattern, and every extra day in milk is dollars. So whilst everyone around the world is using more beef on dairy, the Kiwis are in that same vein. They're using more beef on dairy. But in a tight seasonal calving, if you're all year calving, it's not so important. But in a tight seasonal calving, getting everybody calved within the window is a management issue. But also longer gestation is loss of milk production. And so salmon, this is one of those ideas that I stole from salmon. I'm quite happy to copy. If someone has a really good idea and a really good initiative, I'm not ashamed to replicate it elsewhere. So they went to farmers and said, if you're using a Hereford bull, you are losing up to, based on breed averages, up to 2 weeks of milk. How much is that worth? And when the farmer looks at the price of the semen and how much milk they could have been losing, it makes the Danish Blue a compelling offer.
Wow.
Now, then they grow vigorously, they calve well, and now market acceptance of those calves in the calf market, or even as a what we would call a vealer market. That's improving, and the demand for those calves has been really strong. Now, salmon have been using Belgian Blues in general for some years, and over the last, this is our 3rd year, I think, they've been using the Danish Blues, where we have a difference, and the difference is around calving ease and which is so critical. And historically speaking, there's a lot of dairy farmers around the world who have probably had nightmares around calving and Belgian Blues in the past, but it's a different game today, particularly with our Danish Blues. The calves have been really, really well accepted by the farmers in New Zealand. We've now replicated this in Australia. They've also been really, really well accepted by the farmers. They come early. It makes sense to go with the short gestation. The short gestation is not just about more days in milk. It also gives that cow longer to recover before she has to rebreed. Because in that tight seasonal calving, we don't like cows that take holidays between calving and rebreeding.
Interesting. Jim, looking ahead, what do you expect of the New Zealand market?
The New Zealand market is, I guess, one that I find surprises me. When I think I've got my head around what they do and why they do it, then I learn more. So that they do things different or they change things, I finally figure out what it's all for. We're pretty excited at the moment that we've identified some key traits and ways to predict accurately off the traits here from the Nordic evaluation or the Australian evaluation, just how those bulls are going to rank in the New Zealand evaluation. And we've identified some Holstein bulls that have the particular style and type that will really suit them. Now, we've sold Holstein semen there and been quite happy, but we think we've actually found a compact-bodied animal that is going to be that lower impact, high conversion sort of a cow that they're really looking for. It's great to see that we've been able to find exactly that style of animal within the Nordic population. So that's exciting.
Well, Jim, thanks a lot. An improvised podcast about the New Zealand market. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us. And any final comments?
It's been my pleasure. It's great to share with your listeners, wherever they may be, just what we're doing in our part of the world. And it's exciting to share what Viking is achieving for dairy farmers around the world. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.